You have black folks that have changed their last name. But even with that, you had documentation of what their name was. You have documentation of what their name became. And so you're able to use those two documents, the first document of what their name was. You're able to use that document to trace them backwards. And you're able to use the document of what their name became in order to trace your family members forward. So there's, we do classes on how to do this properly. And for those that want to get information on that, you can just contact us through the show or through the site, the website. But it's going to be a very interesting series in that there are so many black organizations, black civil rights organizations, black cultural organizations that tend to sweep this kind of stuff under the rug. They tend to gloss over it because many of them get their funding from white people. Many of them consider white people to be their friends. Many of them have white people sitting in their meetings and their steering committee meetings every week. So it would, be kind of hard to really tackle some of the things that have to be addressed in order to really repair the black community, the black civilization, the black people. So you see all of these different organizations forming every year, and you're like, but every year the situation in the black communities and around the black world keep getting worse. That is because they are forming, they start out in the pockets of the very whites that they call themselves trying to fight. So when you start an organization, well, the first thing that black civil rights people and black organizations decide to do, if you want to start a clinic in Kenya or whatever, you want to start a program in America, you want to start a program in the islands, you immediately decide to be 501c3 or a nonprofit or an NGO or whatever, and you start immediately asking and begging for money from white people. And so in order for them to give you this money, they have to know, what are you trying to fix with black people? Are you fixing something that is going to be counter to what I am doing to black people or what my company is doing to black people? They may not tell you it in those exact words. But if you got a company that is using slave labor or near slave labor and indentured servants, paying indentured servant wages to people in an African country. Well, if you're going to go to that company and say, I need a $50,000 grant or a $100,000 grant to raise the wages of black people in this African country, well, you're asking them to give you $50,000 or $100,000 to stop them from raping the people. They're not going to do that. And you sound crazy asking them to do that. I mean, they are there for a reason. I had a lot of black people who were, a secretary or any low-level employee at these different companies. And you had people at Walmart and the different fast food places. And I asked them, how many of those executives up in those boardrooms, how many of those owners, those CEOs, have the same last name of black people in your family or black people in your neighborhood? Have you ever looked into why you have the same last name of the owner of your company. So, it definitely creates a situation where blacks are going to have to deal with some uncomfortable situations. But if you're saying you really want to do this reparations and you really want to settle this once and for all, you're going to have to address the core issue, which is who owned who was sold to who, and how are those families responsible for what's going on in black families today. So it's not going to be, a walk in the park. This is going to be a serious undertaking. And I started getting information and emails and whatnot from the politicians asking me, why are you guys doing this? What is the need for this? And I had to kind of put them in their place. And I asked them, what is your last name? Why is your last name, as a black Democrat, why is your last name the same as this white Democrat's last name? How did you get that last name? Why is your last name as a black Democrat the same as this white Republican's last name? How'd you get the same last name as this white Republican? And it's shutting people up now, because that was something they had never even thought about. Normally when they meet some white person with their same last name, it's simply hey, that's my last name too. Funny. And it's left at that. It's very seldom, almost never, that people actually delve into, wait, we got the same last name. How did we get the same last name? I need to look into that. And so the politicians actually got to understand that you cannot talk about being for reparations, but then be afraid to talk about how you got your last name. That you just can't. You're going to have to deal with some ugliness. When you're talking about reparations, you're talking about compensation for some things that were done to black people, and then using that compensation to repair that damage. Well, one of the biggest damages of the de-facto slave trade, for example, when a child is sold or stolen from their home and placed in the de-facto slave trade, child slave trade system, that child, depending on how young they are, that child grows up with a different last name than the last name that they were given at birth. And so the child grows up without their siblings. They grow up without their mother, without their father. So they basically grow up in a world that is not connected to the world that they were snatched from or kidnapped from and before they were sold. So now this child goes on to have a child or children, and they don't know that their last name used to be Smith. You have this young girl, and her name may be, Keisha Walker. And Keisha Walker doesn't know that her name used to be, Tabitha Smith. And so now she thinks that she's part of the Walker family, not knowing that the Walker family is a family she was sold to, that the Smith family is the name that her mother and father has. And then she has to, once she finds that out, she has to find out how her mother, and father got the Smith name. Well, if her mother and her father are Smith, Is that because they were married, or did they, realize they had the same last name, got together? You have to start tracking this stuff. And so, if your mother and father have the same last name, for defect children, if your mother and father have the same last name, then chances are your mother and father were either married on paper, public law married, or they were common law married, and the mother took on that last name.